So, I mean, there's 100 stories I'd love to ask you as a Stan Getz fan about what actually went down in the studio during those recordings, but we probably can't do that in a family setting.
No, you're not allowed to. It's not a family audience.
Yeah. But in terms of, again, using that same room for such different sounds, maybe you and Al could explain a little bit about what is involved, well, or, you know, for different rooms you worked in, Al. I mean, you spoke to me earlier about the book of diagrams that you had made up, pretty much learning how, on the fly, learning how to set up different microphone arrangements in different rooms for different kinds of bands. And I'm just wondering, you know, how you made that adjustment.
Well, we were a poor studio, and we had this funky floor and terrible drapes, but it was an old shooting stage and an elevator that was older than the building. But we were in the same building was Manny's, and the bar next door was Jim and Andy's. So this is a historic building for a lot of people because it was a bar that I put a communication system in, and I had my talk back, and I'd say, I need a trombone player now. Or where's Mr. Getz?
If you don't know and you hadn't read Gene Lee's book, Jim and Andy's was a pretty famous jazz hangout at the time.
Well, it was, but the room, I mean, because I was trained, again, same era of Tommy Dowd and people like that, the room would change per session. So if there was a 10-to-1 jingle, 2 to 5, 7 to 10 might be a big band, and then at 11 or 12 at night, could be an R&B date. You know, it was Mickey and Sylvia 1 second, and Tommy would call up, he said, get set up for a big band. So I kind of kept the room with a certain feeling. Here's going to be the strings. This is once we found it, and all the engineers kept a book. So the theory was if somebody fell ill or got tired, the other guy could do it, and we were really specific. You know, this was Getz's mic. That mic was designated as a sax mic, and the way we set the brass, we never changed it. It just wasn't practical. You know, it wasn't until the band guys started to say, well, we like to play in a row, you know, or small horn section. But the semicircle or the full circle was really a part of the room. And the floor wasn't too crazy, wasn't linoleum or combinations of bad flooring. It was actually cement mixed with vermiculite. And we had to patent it because you could never find it. And we built 3 other studios out of it.
Using that same...
Yeah, because you could play that. You could have the big band play, and you could use no chamber or play with the chambers. But that room was 38 feet by 40, 38 feet deep. 12-foot ceiling, nothing exceptional. But the most fun room to play in. And when that building was designated to come down, that's when we got lucky, and I conned the guy who had the building where Columbia Records was selling off their studios. I mean, what kind of a luck do you have? 799 7th Avenue became the historic record for A&R recording. And Elliot Shiner, a whole bunch of great engineers came out of that school. And I think that's part of what you and I know more than anything, is we were trained, you know. George would know that. RCA, there were so many records that George Avakian made. Have to talk about you, George. But that was the training ground. If you couldn't survive a date and you couldn't capture, you were like on the B list. You know, how you got on the A list is that the musicians liked you. That was important. Then the producer would walk in and feel confident. You know, I did a couple, maybe 4 or 5 years with Creed Taylor. And Creed was a very exacting guy, but very shy. I mean, you learn how to talk to Coltrane or whoever was on there and talk about where the height of the mic was going to be, and they'd look at you because you're rather young. And they'd say, do you know what you're doing? And the best way to get that is would say Dowd said, or Nesui said, or somebody, because Nesui Oregon, Atlantic was fortunate for me because they didn't have enough room. So we became like an annex. So it was a jazz date and 2 hours. I mean, there's no breaks between sessions. You finish, the band go to the bar, and the next band come in. So I think that the beauty of having setups that stay, I mean, Al and I are still making records together. And we have a record that's coming out this week, and you talk about intimate, and there's no trickery. You know, it's just although we used headphones, but we could have worked this date without it. And that's a big deal. I think headphones, for whatever it's worth, except for now, the quality of headphones.
Yeah.
But it got to be really nasty, the style of headphones. And it was so cranked, and you could hear the leakage, and you'd say, boy, you'd never do that with a big band standing. I still fight about that in New York. We're going to do one more date like that with a band in circles. Boy, do they play for each other. And I think that's part of the room. They're playing to the room.
Yeah, just before I ask Randy to weigh in on that a little, because I see you nodding about the headphones, what is the recording that's coming out that you just referenced?
Shelby Lynn.
Okay.
And this is a recording that only has one solo or two when the instrumental comes. And she decided that she loved the atmosphere so much that when Rhodes is playing and the pick guitar and stuff, there is nothing going on. I always thought, well, I'll put a sax maybe, you know, a little string pad. Nothing. So we are talking about this record because the reviews have been incredible. But you can make that record today. And we even left the dog barking there. That's only a producer
Right.
who I
Oh,
love.
I was just going to interject that we did the record on tape, and it never.
I'm sorry,
went
on
in.
tape?
Yeah, you remember
It's
tape?
a
Remember tape?
former medium that looked like about this,
Yeah.
I think. And
We recorded on tape and mixed it to tape, and so it never.
Last
went
night
into
was the
digital.
premiere of
It's
the
really
record.
sounds good. It's really a nice record.
And I told Al last night that the record was previewed in L.A., a vinyl party. There are 12,000
I've been to some of those.
pressings.
Oh, you mean vinyl pressing? Sorry.
Vinyl pressings. So,
No, that's after.
Randy, you were nodding when they were talking about the headphones. And I mean, you started in the studios in the 1960s, really just a few years after the recordings that we're talking about here.
You know, I came to New York in 1966, and as Phil would never remember this or doesn't know, but I had one friend in New York and trying to get into studio work. So this complex, the Jim and Andy's bar under A&R, was the mecca when you first arrived to New York. Friend's name was Alan Faust. He said, come on with me upstairs. Phil Ramone's recording Thad and Mel's band. We could just go up there for a second. So my introduction to New York studios was watching you record Thad and Mel at the original A&R, and I was, what a thrill to be up there and see Phil working, see all those great musicians out there. It was wonderful. And then lo and behold, about 6 months later, I was actually playing in the band. But this was my first introduction to New York studios, was watching this man do his expert job. But with regards, just a funny story came into my head when he was talking about uncomfortable headphones. Another very famous studio around that time in New York was a studio built, and I'm sure you've all heard of this gentleman, the great Rudy Van Gelder, who was a unique personality. He was very steadfast in having rules in the studio. He didn't want you to touch anything. God forbid, don't walk into the booth. If I had walked into the booth with Rudy there, he would have just in 2 seconds thrown me out. Phil, of course, is very kind. But he had, at a particular session, couldn't touch the piano. He wore white gloves himself to touch everything. And I was doing a session, I think I know it was a CTI session, possibly for Stanley Turrentine, and Phil and Rudy had just bought a new set of really uncomfortable headphones. I remember they were red and they were one-piece rubber, and they were really tight on our heads. And Bernie Glow took one of the headphones and was trying to stretch it this way, and lo and behold, it broke in two. And we all went, oh boy, you're in trouble now. I'll never forget this. So Rudy came storming out of the booth and said, give me all your headphones. and went in the back for a while, and then he gave us the headphones, and he had steadfastly written on the bridge, "Do not bend headphones." And we made it through the session, but what a
Just a
character.
quick aside, he never would allow me to ever come to his studio or to even come in the control room. And, he's written a book, and there's this whole series of his work. I still can't go there. I don't know why I'm forbidden.
Always, he
and
had
his-
all those secrets.
Yeah, the
He didn't want
48-track
anybody to know.
machine. Remember that? He had all of the nomenclature on the Sony and all that was taken off. And all of his equipment only had either his name or no name.
Yeah, he
was
would
really
lock
fussy.
the piano.
The piano was locked.
Locked until 5 minutes before the day. He'd unlock it. So the piano player couldn't go in and warm up or anything.
Well, now you mentioned all these stories about Rudy Van Gelder, who I wanted to talk about a little bit here.
Well, we did that now.
All right. Point taken. But still, I think everybody in the audience knows Rudy Van Gelder is the architect of what many people consider an if not the absolute sine qua non of jazz recording sound. That he created a sound that's very distinct, that's unique to him. It became greatly associated with the Blue Note label and others after that, including CTI. I thought we'd listen to just a little bit of one of the legendary recordings that Van Gelder did. This is number 17 on our disc list. Please follow along at home. It's actually from the Cannonball Adderley album called Something Else. It's the very famous version that features Miles Davis of Autumn Leaves, in which I think the individual instruments sound so quintessentially Van Gelder, especially the piano. And I'd love to, especially now that I know it's been locked for centuries, I want to know a little bit more about how he got that sound, or how, if at all, that sound had some influence on you guys.
Made you sing Autumn Leaves. It's 7. Yeah. When you leave the room, it'll be broadcast direct into your cars.
Do we have it at 17, Paul?
Well, it's going to take a little bit to load, so if you want to give us a little...
Well, I think, maybe we don't have to play it because everybody does seem to know the recording. It's pretty well known.
Yeah.
And I think you can pretty much play it in your head and just hear that piano sound that I'm talking about. How does he get that? And, is that something that other people have aspired to, or did that have any impact as you were starting to record jazz? Not at all. Okay.
Well, it did.
Let me talk to Phil then.
Yeah.
I was going to say, MJQ, was a group that we got to record. Oscar Peterson, God rest his soul. But we had, through the courtesy of Dick Hyman, he got me a piano. We had an old 1910, somewhere around there, an 85-key Steinway. And so we didn't have any money, and Dick went to Baldwin, and so we ended up with Baldwin, and then Steinway came in and said, we'll take that piano, put it in the museum, we'll give you a new one. And so the techniques of these pianos, one being a 6'1", I believe, the Baldwin was a tiny house piano, but that's what Joe Beam and all those guys played on. So I found, like, if you mic that, obviously leakage and all that stuff goes into the way Al and I were trained, so leakage is a part of the sound. But each piano became like, John Lewis had to have the action turned into a real soft action. You could look at the piano and it would play the notes, and it was just incredible. It was an inside joke. Only 4 of us knew what it is. But the miking of pianos, for me, to this day, is still incredible.